Welcome to The Real Build. I'm your host, Bill Ryman, your broker builder. And today I have a guest from Edmond, Oklahoma. He is a registered fire protection engineer working in the construction industry. He is skilled in design, fire protection systems, fire alarm, and mass notification and water supply analysis, which I want to get into that. Sounds pretty cool. He is a strong life safety and design professional with a Bachelor of Science focused in fire protection and safety technology from Oklahoma State University. Gus Gagliardi, welcome to The Real Build. I'm excited to have you on, the fire specialist. How you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on, Bill. I appreciate it. Excited to talk to you about, a variety of topics and yeah, excited. Let's get into it.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on. We were talking about before the show, I'm kind of trying to hit these little niche spaces too, where what you're doing is very important. I mean, you're in the fire protection industry. It's not really discussed a lot, but it is such an important topic in what I do in residential and in commercial as well. You specialize more in commercial, so we're going to get into that, and you can do a little bit of residential. So happy to have you on. But with that being said, obviously, I always like to kind of hear more about you. So, who is Gus Gagliardi?
For sure. Yeah. So I from Edmond, Oklahoma, Okie born and raised, but went to school for fire protection and safety engineering technology at OK State. It's one of the premier kind of programs for technology and fire protection engineering in the state. So got my start there. Came out of college, worked for a fire suppression contractor for about a year up in Omaha, Nebraska. So got a little bit of experience on the construction side of things and seeing how things are built, getting into the nuts and bolts of designing sprinkler systems and, kind of materials and listings and that sort of thing. Um, Came back to Oklahoma. Now I work for a firm called Frankfurt Short Brugia. It's a full service architecture and engineering firm out of Oklahoma City. So we do a variety of projects all across the nation, all across, outside the country as well. So it's been really good. Been at FSB for about 4 years now. So been loving it. Been in the industry about 5 years in architecture, engineering, and construction. And yeah, so coming out of college and just trying to fill the gaps between, what they teach you in school and what it means to be a professional. I started the Fire Code Tech podcast and, started connecting with professionals like yourself and seeing people who are, being excellent professionals and, people who are pushing the limits on communication and bringing people together and kind of just learning and spreading good information. And so, yeah, started the podcast about fire and life safety, talking to experts in the industry. And, I resonate with your sentiment of I find people who I don't know things, I don't know subjects as well about, and just
Hmm.
try to, talk to them about their expertise and lean into, what people are passionate about and want to talk about in these conversations that happen behind closed doors and are truly
Hmm.
fascinating. But, lots of times that's just where they stay. So yeah, that's the elevator pitch.
I love it, man. And no, you are right. And like I said, just not a lot of people know what you're doing, and really they should be paying attention to it. And fire safety is so key in I mean, any building you walk into, any house you walk into, and so on. One thing I wanted to ask you, though, obviously within your journey of life too, how did you choose fire protection? Out of everything you could have done, how'd you get involved in it? What was your reason behind it?
Yeah, and so this is like a funny topic because it seems like everybody I talk to on my podcast, I'm like, "How did you get into fire protection?" And it's like you either had a family member that
Yeah.
was in it. My grandpa was a fire chief and a firefighter,
Okay.
and so I always knew I wanted to be in engineering and kind of had that science math background, and so grandpap was in fire chief and my dad was an engineer, so wanted to go to Oklahoma State, that those stars just all kind of align in that way. Looking for in the job market in fire protection is just outstanding. I was talking with career advisors at school. Oh, I want to, have job security, job reliability, be able to have good opportunities as a professional. And so, man, it's just been outstanding in my short career as a fire protection and life safety professional. The opportunities are outrageous.
Yeah, it's crazy how your kind of path as a kid or being young too. It kind of follows suit of what a family member does and so on. I mean, I'm similar. Obviously, I didn't think I was gonna growing up. I didn't want to be in the construction industry because I was always kind of doing the odds and ends work or a lot of the hard labor work, I should say, stuff like that. But now I love it and I have a passion for it. And it's just like you. I mean, you grew up probably not knowing you were going to be in the fire industry, but our fire protection industry, and now you have such a passion for it, and you're doing it now, and you're probably just trying to figure out how you can do it better too. I mean, and an example of that is with your podcast as well. So I give you a lot of credit for taking that
Yeah.
leap.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's so I think people struggle with like, oh, what am I gonna be with that when I grow up? What what does it all
We
mean?
all do.
And yeah, and so I think finding something that has good room to grow and just leaning into it, getting passionate about it, I think is important for really anybody. So yeah, I hear what you're
Hmm.
saying.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about kind of what you're doing so the audience knows. Like,
Sure.
what does fire protection entail? What goes into it?
Yeah.
What services are you providing? Just so the audience can understand of what you actually do.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question, Bill. So what is a fire protection engineer? So I am involved on the design side of things. There's engineers that are located on, each side of the fence, design and construction. And when I say design, what I mean is I help prepare construction documents so that the general contractor has a biddable set of construction documents. That's GCs, that's subs. I get in at the very preliminary stage of construction
Okay.
to basically analyze, is this building, in compliance with codes and standards for the authority, that we're working with. So, say we're working in, you know, we're not working in, but for example, Austin, Texas, what does Austin require for their building codes? What have they adopted? What are their local ordinances? Systems wise, what is required for the building? Taking a look at code required minimums. So, part of my job, I guess fortunately and unfortunately, is determining when fire protection engineering is necessary.
Hmm.
Sometimes if it's a small enough building and it's, metal construction or, non-combustible construction, I, design myself out of the equation. I'll take a look at the code, say, based on these set of factors, I, we're not required to have fire suppression or fire alarm in these buildings. So that's a very common practice thing for me to do is take a look at a building in a very early stage from a programming standpoint or from a, basic blocks and diagrams sort of things. Take a look at the heights, allowable areas, and just kind of say, what are we needing fire protection and life safety wise for a building with these characteristics? And so that is, kind of a 3,000, 30,000 foot elevation view of what a fire protection engineering does. And so to your point about specific services and, what kind of actual activities. So there's a life safety component, which we kind of covered. So when we do determine we have a sprinkler system, you know, what do we need? Is the supply from the local water supply enough to, for the demand of the sprinkler system for that building? I help take a stab at that determination. Do we need a fire pump? Do we need a fire protection water storage tank? Kind of take a look, water supply analyze, and say, here's the system demand, here's the water supply curve, here's where we're at. you know, make that's a big determination because that has programming implications and obviously footprint kind of implications, and architects don't like seeing the fire protection stuff in general. So usually we're avoiding that at all costs from a cost perspective and from an perspective. So that's a big component of what a FPE does. They work in a lot of different, yeah, occupancy types or building types. So we could see everything from aircraft hangar to a
Wow.
more industrial facility that like a storage or a high piled storage or that sort of thing. So yeah, a big part of my job is taking a high level look at the hazards associated with the facility and just kind of, you know, taking a look at specifically what these hazards entail for the occupants and what the owner wants to do for the facility. It's not my job to say you can or you can't do this. It's my job to say you can do this. Here's what you have to provide fire and life safety wise in order to accomplish your goal for what you want for your facility. If that ends up being to have cost implications that are beyond the bounds of what the owner can accept, then we can tailor this to what they need, and yeah. But that's a long-winded high level overview, and we could explore that more, or if there's anything that piqued your interest specifically about that, I could talk until I'm blue in the face on FPE business.
And that's why you do what you do. But so you're doing the design part of it. So you're taking whatever the architect draws, architect's giving you the plans, and then
Yep.
you're implementing what you need to do by code. So obviously
Yep.
codes are different. Are you working more national throughout the country, or do you kind of stay in the Oklahoma area? How are you doing that? And then on
Yeah.
top of, how do you, what if you miss something on a plan, or
Yeah.
something like that too? How do you go about that? Because I mean, from your explanation right there, there's a lot into this.
Right.
And it's not an easy job. I mean, and if you miss something, it could be a key problem to
Yeah.
the whole entire building. So just talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, we work all over the nation. I got a job in on each coast and a ton of stuff in Oklahoma too. So one of the greatest things about, fire protection and the firm that I work for is, at the level and kind of engineering detail that's involved, the fire protection engineer doesn't have the same level of scope that a mechanical or an electrical engineer does. So, if you want to talk like percentage of budget wise, the architect, rough numbers, and I'm not in the as much of the bidding of jobs, but rough numbers, the architect might be, 25-30% of the job depending on the complexity and the design layout. The mechanical and like mechanical plumbing and fire protection might be whatever, another 25% of the project budget. And then you got structural in there as well. And so of that 25% of the mechanical budget, I'm probably anywhere from 3 to 10% of that construction budget from a fire protection system standpoint. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about walls and what you need to do to fireproof a wall. Passive fire protection is not my area of expertise. So um, yeah, I mean, so as far as how to deal with complexity and how to make sure that you don't miss things in design, all of our design goes through oversight through multiple channels. Quality control is huge in the industry. It's standard in the industry, it's standard in a lot of contracts, review periods, oversight periods. There's not a single design that I touch that doesn't get reviewed by a more senior engineer and that takes a look and evaluates it and says, yes, this is in line with what we expect for this facility with these codes. And then by and large, I'd say a lot of the buildings are just uh, I say vanilla. If it's not vanilla, fire alarm and fire sprinklers, and then of course you do get the stuff with some really dangerous things like hazardous materials or an aircraft hangar. And, that is a greater complexity and greater risk for the occupant. And so, but the timelines for these projects can be, to acquire and to just design these projects, that the timeline can be long. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things in place, quality control measures, checklists, and things that we go through to make sure that we're not missing anything, drilling down into details like that. But yeah, it's important work, and it's definitely something to be detail oriented. I could always use more work on that, being able to get down in the weeds on the detail. I find just naturally I'm more of a have a better view for the scope of things than a man reading through a block of specification text and picking apart the words. That fire protection engineering is such a discipline that there's legal definitions in the building code, and so you're literally having to say, oh well, this word has a meaning that's spelled out, like a dictionary meaning that's spelled out in the building code. So we're very explicit about word usage and about, like kind of interpreting the code in that way.
So let's go into because obviously you specialize in commercial, and there's a lot to know about commercial too, and then we'll touch on residential after this because that's what I specialize in. But
Yeah.
starting with commercial, just for the listener, obviously this show's a little bit more dedicated towards the client and what to look for in these situations. So if somebody is buying a commercial building or building a commercial building, you know, what should they be looking for as far as fire protection? What should stand out that they're not going to have issues later on?
Man, I that's a great question, and I would say that first and foremost that you need to have your maintenance. Um, make sure that you have proper documentation of your maintenance for the building, because at the end of the day, the owner is responsible for the fire and life safety systems. So there are codes that require scheduled routine maintenance for fire and life safety systems, NFPA 25 for fire sprinkler and water-based systems, NFPA 72 for fire alarm systems, and these are code required inspection and maintenance and testing procedures. And so usually, this is performed by a fire suppression or fire alarm contractor, and so it is your responsibility as a building owner to have this documentation of that you are performing you know these duties that are required of you. So, if you're going to take the responsibility of buying a commercial building, as a fire and life safety professional, you want to make sure you have all the documentation available in order to say, yes, I'm in compliance. No, I don't have any egregious fire and life safety threats in my building. I just had a podcast interview with the environmental health and safety professional. He had a great line. He said, you know, uh, safety professionals maintain the company's right to do business. So you want to maintain your right to do business by maintaining your systems in a code required way. So I'd say that first and foremost, the maintenance documentation is there as a business professional. Secondly, I would say that, if it's available, it's not always available, but documentation on the construction and the engineering documents and the shop drawings for the facility. If I was buying a building, I would want that documentation, because anytime you have to make a modification of the existing facility, you want to do some work, you want to renovate a space, and you bought the buildings and you didn't think to ask, where the archive of drawings for the facility is. Now you're having to go pay somebody to go document this stuff in real time, diagram
Hmm.
it, and then you have to still do the existing work. So that would be a huge thing. And part of that due diligence is, taking a look at the documentation in the form of shop drawings and record drawings and making sure that's there if you're going to purchase a facility.
So, so with all you, I mean, there was a lot there what you just said too. And for the common, let's say the common commercial purchase, the guy that's purchasing a commercial building, he probably
Yeah,
doesn't have time to deal with that.
sure.
So we'll just go from reality here. A business guy purchasing a commercial building or building something. Who would you recommend somebody, a client, to hire to do that kind of due diligence stuff? Or you might have brushed on this a little bit, but you got, the certain inspections, and obviously what kind of inspectors should they hire to do this on average? What are the costs to do all this due diligence too? Then we'll get into residential, but I'm just trying to cover all these basics here.
Sure, sure. I don't know if I can speak to costs as much, but I can speak to like the parties that would be involved.
Okay.
So as far as like you could get a fire suppression contractor or an architecture and engineering firm to do this due diligence,
Okay.
get a report on the facility, say, hey, here's what we identified as discrepancies, here's what you're missing on your documentation.
Gotcha.
Or you could just go to the fire suppression contractor that's doing the maintenance right now, and maybe that due diligence piece is something we'll get into later. But you can just go to the contractor that's they're required to do it unless you have a facilities maintenance person who's doing all that for
Mm-hmm.
you, which
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a fairly large facility. And that still happens. It's unfortunately it's becoming more and more uncommon to have that facilities maintenance person unless you're working in like healthcare or extremely large facilities. But so those people would have that documentation and would be able to provide value to somebody who's making that
Okay.
purchase. Um, yeah, I'm not as much on the business development. I wish I could speak more to like the cost of it, but I just more of the guy cranking cogs out in design and engineering at this point in my career.
There you go. And let's go into residential though, because obviously this is where I specialize in too. You say you've dabbled in the residential a little bit on your end too. So let's start with what are you seeing as far as
Yeah.
fire safety in residential?
Yeah, so that's a great topic, and I might have a clarifying question in this of like what you consider residential, because this is I'm so much a code nerd that I just go right back to the building code of, what is the
Let's do
building code?
both. Do multifamily, and then you can
Yeah,
do. We'll start with multifamily, then we'll go into. We'll do just housing.
sure, yeah. So it's like on the housing front, what I see is a trend in the industry, if you will, is so basically, uh, you know, code adoption happens at the state and the city level. And so one of the big topics that people in my industry are pushing is, fire sprinklers in houses. That's something that
Mm,
is for residential construction, people don't want. There's only two states in the nation that have like code required fire sprinklers in houses in residential. So I see them, as far as if you look at the fire statistics, residential is overwhelmingly the highest number of fires. So it's something that my industry is always pushing for is fire sprinklers in residential homes. So as far as like standard home construction, usually like so I can speak for Oklahoma, we don't adopt the section of the International Residential Code that requires you to have sprinklers in the house, based on if your house meets this criteria. So, most places in the nation they don't want that. They don't want the added expense, the added maintenance, the cost of it all. Even though it's has an equivalent cost per square foot as like a flooring replacement, like a cheap flooring replacement. It's still anybody constructing houses is not looking to add costs anywhere. So that size, I would say, is a trend in the industry. Haven't designed too many sprinkler systems for residential, like what I would consider standard homes people live in. They go under like they're called 13D systems. They're designed under NFPA 13D. I've done a couple of these systems in my life. for like townhomes, or where the person insuring or building has chosen to install this system, even though it's not code required. So, the common system for fire alarm for a residence, and these are code required systems, are multi-station fire and smoke alarms. And so these are code required in the home. They are not the same as a commercial fire alarm panel. They're required at a couple different locations throughout your home, near the bedrooms slash in the bedrooms. And so that's commonly the fire protection systems, is like system side, where we see the FPE stuff in residential homes. And so, yeah, so these are like fire alarm basis. They're a little bit less complex than commercial smoke systems, and they're not code required to be monitored. So you don't have to have a security company monitoring these 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's not the case in commercial. You have to have those systems monitored 24/7, either by a person that's sitting in a control room or by a central receiving station that's tied to something 24/7. So that's kind of like on just standard home. Um, it's pretty bare if you're not talking about
Yeah.
passive fire protection. Just because, like I said, the jurisdictions don't want to adopt
Yeah.
that cost implication.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit too, because I'm interested in that. It's like why not implement that? Because it's like you said, it's the common majority of fires that happen usually happen in a residential home, and why not adapt that to help prevent that? If a sprinkler system is like the price of installing tile or something like that. It's really not a huge expense in the overall home. I mean, if it's a massive home, yeah, but if you're building a massive home, you probably have the money to put in a sprinkler system
Right.
too, which would stop a lot of the issues too, with fires in homes, and insurance costs probably would go down quite a bit as
Yeah.
well, and so on. So it doesn't really make sense. So let's talk about that because I'm interested in this
Yeah.
too.
And so, like, if you want to talk about statistics that are shocking and to make this issue more, just a no-brainer, is if you take a look at the, amount of human life loss incidents in buildings that are fully sprinklered, the numbers are insanely low. Like, there is like less than a dozen fires that have ever happened in fully sprinklered buildings where
Hmm.
it's like, like the numbers are outrageous. So like it just doesn't make sense to me. And of course, I'm always going to be pumping the systems to, pay my bills, but full disclosure and all that. But yeah, I mean, if you take a look, the most common place a fire is going to start in a residential home is in the kitchen. And residential has a way higher incidence case rate than commercial occupancies, just um, by their very nature.
And there's more stuff that can burn in a residential too, because
Yeah,
people got more crap. So it's
right.
like, that's another thing.
Yeah, I don't understand it. It's something that there are plenty of people lobbying for this. Fire sprinkler companies, professional organizations, huge lobby groups out there for this effort. It would be. I feel like I don't know. Maybe in my lifetime, but I feel like eventually it's just gonna happen. I mean, it's the equivalent of the valving and the piping sizes. Like, I don't want to compare it to an irrigation system because sprinklers are already confused enough for,
Hmm.
lawn sprinklers. I can't even Google fire sprinklers without putting that to qualifier in there. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the piping sizes and the physical impact to the building is pretty low.
Well, if you
Um,
have a single story house and you're already running, like here, we're running plumbing overhead anyway, it's like, okay, if you did a separate plumbing for a sprinkler system, it's overhead with the other plumbing as well. So
right.
why not? And it kind of makes you think too. Just it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways now that the more you think about it. But it's just, I think it's because it's it's just not common. People don't think about it. They don't think about, you see it in a commercial building, a hotel, something like that. Yeah. And most of the time you don't even notice the little sprinklers in the rooms and stuff.
Right.
But in a residential home, it's just never existed. So maybe that's people's attitude on it. It's like, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, what's shocking and to drive this point home even more, with the more plastics and different things that we get in the home, the time to flash over, which is basically the amount of time to where it's untenable, nobody can survive in a home, is dwindled down to, at like less than 3 minutes. So basically, from the incipient point of the fire to the point where you can no longer survive has gone from when we used to have legacy construction with more non-combustible natural fibers and products used to be like 10, 15 minutes.
Hmm.
So now by the time that the fire department gets to the house, it's post flashover, which is already past the point where you could save anyone that's inside the home. So I mean, like, it's frightening the amount of plastics and petrochemical products that we're putting in the home, and you don't want to spend the equivalent of like you were saying, composite tile to save lives. It's and it's like the size and uh footprint take up as like a standard residential plumbing lead in backflow, like these sort of systems. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. It's been a big change in the just legacy construction versus modern construction, and the amount of petrochemicals in the houses is only going to increase. I mean, we're getting more composites in that and like that every day.
Yeah, more crap, more stuff that's gonna light on fire and make your
Yep.
house light up like a Christmas tree. So it's just like maybe this discussion, maybe our discussion triggers something with home builders or something that makes a change. But it's like you said, maybe sometime in our lifetime that change will happen, and lives will be saved and so on as far as residential and people's stuff, their memories. I mean, their homes filled with memories. You think you want to protect that too. And water's not going to hurt a lot of those valuable items, especially if it's in a, even in a plastic bin or something like that. So it's just
Yeah.
fire is going to melt right through it and melt
Yeah.
everything. So,
That's what I was gonna say. Is like people want to be like, oh no, we don't want water, and maybe that's a good point to touch on. If we're looking at an electrical room or a server room, they're like, oh, we don't want sprinklers in this room. And while sure, I don't want to run sprinkler piping right over your server or your electrical panel, you know, you the fire that destroys everything in the whole building is gonna cost you a lot more money than water damage
mhm.
from one sprinkler. Most fires are put out by just one sprinkler. So if there is a fire and the sprinkler does go off, it's not like in the movies where every sprinkler in the house goes off, and there's a romantic scene and then the movie ends. One sprinkler goes off. There's a I have one back here. I'd go grab it with my headphones. I'd be yanking something out. But basically, the fusible element is a little vial with the alcohol solution in it that heats up, expands, breaks the frangible bulb. It releases a seal or a seating on the top of the sprinkler. Water discharges from that one sprinkler head, and then you oftentimes extinguish the fire with one sprinkler head. And that sprinkler is, for residential purposes, I don't know what it would put out, somewhere in between like to 10, 30 gallons per minute. That's
Oh.
a lot of water, but it's going to be a lot easier remediation than the bulldozing that's going to take place if you have a fire take down your whole house.
Yeah, but it's like you just said too, though. If you think about it, yeah, water can ruin some stuff like that. I mean, if I had a fire and water put out, this room that I'm in right now, for example, if there's a fire and water, I had a sprinkler system and it put out the fire. Okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? I lose this computer and this that I'm talking on right now, probably. But there's stuff that's protected in this room that the water's not going to penetrate through, and that stuff, which is more valuable than this computer or could be, is going to be safe and so on. So it's like and if there was a fire and you let the fire happen, everything's gone. I mean,
Yeah.
everything's burnt to ashes unless you have a fire safety box, but who knows how much those can withstand
Oh,
too. And
yeah.
your whole house is gone. Every single memory in your home is gone. So this is a huge topic that you're bringing up that a lot of people don't think about it at all. Is like, yeah, why not? One sprinkler's not going to ruin everything. It's going to save a lot.
No, yeah, and I mean, like, even if the fire doesn't say it doesn't burn down the whole house, the smoke and what the smoke is going to do to your
Yeah.
home and or your business was part of a project where we took a look at a facility that had a fire and a large facility and they did testing at their different sensitive pieces of equipment and took a look at where they could measure hazardous chemicals on their pieces of equipment. It got everywhere. So the cost, even if the fire doesn't take the whole house, these particles from the smoke or they just get in the HVAC, they're going to ruin your electronics. I mean, like it's not a good deal.
Yeah, yeah, it's like like we'll go back to this example again. A computer is it's yeah, it's money, it's an expense, but it's replaceable versus something that's sentimental to you that's irreplaceable. That's what I meant by the value statement too. It's just with a fire, you're going to lose everything versus water, you're going to just lose the minimal things that
Yeah.
you can replace later on.
Yeah, I've seen some really touching and impactful stories of one sprinkler like saving a child's life from a space heater up against a curtain, a fire that is
Wow.
literally 3 feet away from a child sleeping. And, it would have taken the young child's life. And instead, one sprinkler head puts out that fire before anybody even knows it's happened. And so what's the cost really here? So, yeah, I don't know. If you're a part of a lot of these associations, they will put out little bulletins when there's a sprinkler system that saves a building or saves a life. So I'm on some of these newsletters, and man, some of the stories are incredible.
Yeah, I bet, man. It really makes you think. This discussion definitely makes you think about why not, why people aren't doing it. But it's like I said, I just think it's kind of the standard industry standard in residential that nobody really thinks about it. And people, it's like you said off the right off the bat is it's an expense, and a lot of people that are building a house are concerned about a certain expense and adding more expense, and they're like, do I really need that? How often's a fire going to happen in my home? That can't happen to me. Well, the electrical is much more advanced now. There's no way my outlet's going to spark and create a fire issue or anything like that, but you just never know.
Yeah, what is it worth to you? So, I mean, that's a point. I think a lot of people are trying, it's trending towards more safe, but
Yeah,
the codes and the wheels and the processes of the building codes, and they turn slow. So I mean, there are things that there are still code changes we're seeing that just got adopted in like the 2015 codes that were changes we saw from 9/11. So
yeah,
to give you a perspective of how long it takes to get these changes implemented, it takes a long time. Even with the very tragic fires. Unfortunately, my profession it's one that is kind of built on tragedy. So a part of my schooling is learning about these historic fires and where and how they have influenced the way that we construct buildings. And so I just have a list of these gruesome fires and how they've changed. Door hardware. Egress sizing. Taking a look at a more recent example of like the Grenfell Towers and or Notre Dame. You take these cultural or life safety um, things and look at the impact. What is the cost of us doing this right? And it's at some points, I mean, like the Notre Dame, it's you can't put a value on what that building and the pieces of art and the things that were there, what that meant. So I don't know, it's a complex conversation.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit though too, because you research into these things and you're trying to find solutions to them too. And I mean,
Yeah,
these solutions go into everything. They go into multifamily, they go into commercial, they go into residential even
sure.
too. Let's talk about some of the past stuff that you've learned, you've seen in history. I find this very interesting. It's my
Yeah.
show. I want to hear about
Hey,
it.
man.
So,
Yeah, for sure. I understand that. So, like, I've read some books recently on some historic fires. So, like, taking a look at Iroquois theater fires happened in 1803. It was a fire I read about recently, a big assembly theater, but something that we see now and that people should be aware of. It was rushed through construction, through design,
yeah,
and
what you say?
so it was had some corruption involved with some local officials getting payoffs and the life safety features were not installed correctly in these buildings. And here's a note that corresponds to us in modern day. It's ended up in a loss of life incident that we haven't had. It's like the greatest loss of life incident that we've had in the last uh, several hundred years. And fire started from an electrical arc, and then they had locked the doors to keep people from moving in and out of the theater during the performance. And so, this was one of the factors that led into the serious, casualties. The fire protection systems weren't installed right. They had smoke venting that was nailed shut. They had a sprinkler system that their water tank. It was just like a comedy of errors. How many different things went wrong, but you know, uh, take a look at a more recent event like the Station nightclub fire. Don't recall the exact year, but this is a fire that was in an assembly space. I believe that you can find a YouTube video of this one. And basically, a fire started due to pyrotechnics in the assembly space, and then it quickly caught the whole facility on fire. They didn't have adequate egress sizing, so they just had one of those turnstile doors at the front,
Oh wow.
and basically provided a huge crowd crush event where people had just smashed up against this turnstile door. So the way that the doors are designed now is to, basically fail in a way that is conducive to egress. And so the way that we design buildings now is doors open in the path of egress. So they open outwards. And so, these are some of the lessons learned. I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these different fires and things we're looking at. You talk about more recent things that are kind of fascinating, is like the Beirut tragedy with the ammonium nitrate. It was a huge deal.
Mm.
Ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer. This is a well-known hazard in hazardous materials. And so we take a look at, why did this happen? Well, ammonium nitrate's an oxidizer. The oxidizer got contaminated. As it got contaminated, it started to decompose. There's a fire in a separate portion of the facility. The fire, in combination with this extreme amount of an oxidizer, causes a detonation that levels a city. And so there are these. Seems like I'm sure it's just because I'm plugged into all these networks of these code nerds that look at these tragedies, but these are not rare events. If I can point to you know a dozen in the past in 10 years then of these truly profound and tragic fires and industrial disasters. Um, yeah, I mean, what does that say? We need to learn about these things and talk about these things. And I think there's like a whole podcast over the Grenfell Towers, and just like talking about in detail the litigation, the investigation, and just how this all pans out. It's not good. So I'm endlessly fascinated with it. Eventually I think I'll put out some solo casts where I just go through the lessons learned on these different fires, because people love history. People love you know like it's like what people watching all these murder shows, like tragedy is
Hmm.
like people are just compelled by these stories of, you know what I mean? Because it's real, it's tangible. You know, people can really kind of taste that stuff.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I mean, I just typed in on Google recent tragic fires, and I mean the list is incredible. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
crazy, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
You want to talk about another like fascinating thing is I follow a guy who's Chris Clooney. He's a dust safety science guy, and so for those who don't know, dust when it gets fine enough is an explosible hazard. So sugar plants, places where there's fine dust like woodworking or these different places, the particulates get so fine that when they light on fire, they explode, they detonate or deflagrate. Detonate. Difference between deflagration and detonation is supersonic and deflagration is subsonic. So usually you can protect a facility for deflagration, like you can make venting that will collapse if there's an explosion, or you can make like blowout panels in a wall. You can't really design a facility for detonations. It's you have to separate these hazards from
mhm.
other commercial facilities and that. So yeah, I mean that's a whole nother rabbit hole of hazards, if you will.
It's crazy. I and just going off of that, just thinking about like just even in a home in general too. Well, even going back to what you said about how many corners are actually cut in a lot of these commercial buildings and stuff because of time frame and time crunch and so on too. Even in residential, I mean, it's hard where I'm at to cut. You can't really. Obviously, there's inspections and stuff like that that you go through, but there are ways that I'm sure builders are doing it to cut costs and so on too. And we're not one of them. I'm a big advocate on doing it the right way. And I always, even everybody that calls my office to talk to me about building a house, I say we don't cookie cut anything. You pay for what you get. I'm an advocate on that. We're not going to be the cheapest builder. So, but you're going to get a quality product and so on. But it makes you think about just the stuff you're saying and even these multifamily units and stuff too that a lot of these a lot of these multifamily developers are putting up because they have a time crunch. There's a timeline. They want to get it up because the faster they get that building up, the more money goes back into their pocket, and they're trying to
Right.
beat certain economic things that are going on too, and they don't want to be too late and lose money. So it's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it is definitely, and yeah, I totally agree with you. You get what you pay for in life, and I've been illustrated that through working with contractors or working with just on my own house, with the bathroom renovation or something, and you pay for the low bid, you get the low bid most of the
Hmm.
time. So that's part of the reason why it's a lot of fun working for a firm that you know. Uh, respects quality and likes to bring the solution that is code not just code compliant, but what's best for the owner and what's best for fire and life safety. It's not every firm, I'm sure, has the has that as a business model, and I'll tell you, it's a lot more fulfilling doing business in that way
Hmm.
than designing to the razor's edge and cutting corners. And I'm sure that I would lose sleep at night if that was somebody who I worked for and that's the way they like to do business. So yeah, I don't know. It's a choice, and it I don't know, it's kind of dumbfounding, really. You gotta take these systems seriously, and I certainly do.
Yeah, because of what you do too. There's lives at stake too. I
Yeah.
mean, it's crazy to think about, but there really is. And even with what I do on the residential side, building a house, if you cut any corners or do the wrong things and so on, I mean, if something goes wrong and somebody's hurt, who's that on? And there's
Yeah.
builders out there that don't have a conscience. They're about the money. They're about, that's what they want, turn them and burn them is the way I say.
Yeah.
No pun intended in this conversation, but no, I mean it's just they're turning houses left and right as fast as possible, and the quality's getting cut and so on. But it's like when stuff does go wrong, it's not on them. They're covered and so on too, to think into this too. One thing I was thinking during our discussion, because like I said, this is more open book discussion
Sure.
here is, where are you seeing common areas where for fires taking place? Where should people pay most attention to? Obviously you said
Yeah.
kitchen, but what's
Yeah.
happening in the kitchen? Is it a pan burning that somebody left? Is it,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I'm guilty of leaving a candle burning. I've took a
Yeah.
nap and I took a nap. I can't left a candle burning. It burnt down all the way to the bottom and somehow uh completely left the whole surrounding candle and ended up lighting one of my dressers on fire because the clear coat on top of
Oh
the
my
dresser.
gosh.
I
I'm
woke
sure you're
up
not
with
the only one that's done something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, and I looked in the master bedroom. There's smoke coming out the upper door, and I go, "Oh no!" And I ran in there as
Oh
fast as I
my.
can, taking towels and beating the fire with towels and so on. I got it out, but I was like,
Man.
"Man, imagine if I didn't wake up, how that would
Man.
have
Oh my gosh. That's wild.
been."
Yeah, so there's a couple different places. I'd say that number one is like you're saying, unattentive cooking, people putting something on the stove, people walking away. I think that's if you go to nfpa.org, they have little like handouts on their like little informational sheets. Maybe I'll shoot you a link to it, but
Yeah.
they produce these little like kind of infographics with common areas for like kitchen safety, and so you can get like an idea of the different ways that but I think there's a lot of appliances, unattentive cooking, people, man, every year about the people don't people underestimate the dangerousness of deep frying stuff. You always hear about people with their turkeys, and so
Oh, yeah.
not realizing that if you don't pat that bird down and you drop it into a vat of hot oil, and any sort of moisture is it's gonna you could explode that turkey not doing it right and catch your whole house on fire. So I'd say that's another one that people underestimate, or is that a common source of fire is fat fires. So
Makes you it makes you think how many fat turkey fires happen every Thanksgiving per
it's
year.
it's a big number. I think it would surprise most people if you took a look at how many people start fires because of the the turkeys and deep fat frying them. I mean, they're delicious, don't get me wrong,
Oh
but
yeah.
man, that's it can be dangerous for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this has been obviously a great conversation. Let's kind of we're getting towards the end here, but let's kind
Sure.
of redirect back to what your expertise is here, because
Yeah.
I was kind of going through your podcast too, and everybody should definitely check that out. I definitely do think and would be a big fan of if you went through some of those historic fires and kind of explained it too
Yeah.
on your podcast. That'd be a great episode, I think, because I'm into
Yeah.
historical stuff. I mean, a lot of people are, like you said, it's almost like
Oh
those
yeah.
shows on. Maybe you'll have a Netflix show. Yeah.
I doubt it, but I'm happy with being a podcast host and being an engineer, and having the chance to talk to people. And but no, I'm definitely gonna do. I read a couple books recently on the Iroquois theater fire, and then there is another one I can't remember, but a couple of these. There's really good books out there if you want. I mean, like basically, like professors from universities will they need to write, or it's like publish or perish. So they'll take one of these really interesting historic fires and they'll write a great book about it, and it's just kind of explains the tragedy in great detail, probably of more interest to somebody who's not just like me, so far in the weeds on the technical and just wants to hear like specifics on the code and all that. But yeah, there's some good books out there.
Was
But
Notre Dame was that the most recent fire that happened? What was the most recent big
mm,
time fire? I can't remember. Was it that one, or it was on the news? Maybe was it a year ago now?
Notre Dame was a big one. Uh, I
Was it in a
think
church?
Yeah, Notre Dame was in a church, and what happened was they were in the process of renovation and some sort of reaction with the tile replacement on the roof, and the way that they were like I don't remember if it was like a tar mopping or something, like some process like
So
like a
okay.
space heater or something went off in the attic space where they were doing some refurbishing, and it just lit the whole place up like matchsticks. I mean, it's all combustible construction, I think. Or no, was it? I don't know. But yeah, basically the refurbishment process or renovation process they were going through like really went off the rails and destroyed a cultural landmark, uh, for that's
Yeah, it's
like
crazy.
half a century old, or I mean, half a millennium old is what I meant to say, or maybe longer. I don't know. Some people are probably going to light me up.
So let's go. So last thing, real quick.
Sure,
Let's go back to before I get into some personal questions with you
sure,
that I
sure.
always do with everybody. Let's go back to the multifamily side of
Yeah,
things. That's kind of your expertise
yeah,
is and commercial. Obviously, we talked about that.
yep,
So multifamily, what are you seeing on that? I probably have some multifamily developers that listen to this and
yeah.
also deal with clients and so on. So, what are you seeing on that side of things that people should look out for?
Man, so yeah, I have a lot more experience probably with apartment or
Hmm.
multifamily, and so what I would say is that I've been seeing we got a couple projects with apartments and residential, and fire protection for these facilities can be either a 13R or a 13 system. So basically 13R is a pared down fire protection system, kind of like that one that we were talking about earlier for home sprinklers, but it's a little bit pared down, and it provides an advantage for hydraulically, and just for the system is a little bit less complex. And so for these systems and these facilities, that's usually one of the big questions is, can we get a 13R system for our apartment or our building? Because basically you can't if you don't meet some criteria, like I forget if it's 4 or 5 stories maximum, and then yeah, like a square footage limitations. But why would you would want these systems is uh, they are less hydraulically demanding, so you got less pipe and fittings, and so smaller pipe. You still have the system, but it is easier to maintain because it's less complex. And so that's a design process that I get into frequently, is taking a look at that analysis. Can we do a 13R system for sprinklers that in a building in which we have to have sprinklers? So that would be an option that I would want people who are in that sort of construction to be aware of, because it can have cost savings. And then yeah, on the fire alarm sort of things, there's basically you got your standard fire and smoke alarms, or smoke alarms like you have in your home, and then there's more traditional commercial smoke detectors. And so um, yeah, have a conversation with your fire alarm subcontractor, which of these is most cost competitive. There's different situations in which you can get an advantage for one system versus the other system. So as far as these conversations and talking about, how can somebody who's in the process of developing these buildings stay competitive, I would say knowing your options and knowing places to be competitive, or cost effective, if you will. So for these fire and life safety systems, so that would be my tips there, um, on
Yeah.
the apartment or multifamily.
Yeah, really good points there too. One thing that you've talked about with all these different than what even with residential housing is smoke detectors too. I mean, there's a lot of people that are guilty of it. They just let them go bad, or they just let them just completely go offline and don't even
Yeah,
utilize them. How important are they?
yeah,
Coming from your perspective, whether it's residential, commercial, how important is a smoke detector? I mean, I'm guilty of letting some of the batteries run out, or if they're not hardwired, which I need this house I bought, I still need to get them hard. I think these ones are actually hard. Yeah, this one's working here, but mine are working. So I'm not
that's
guilty
good.
of that, but I could update them because these are older. But, how important is it?
Yeah, it's important. I mean, you're supposed to test them yearly. I mean, who does that? I mean,
That's
I
the
don't even
thing.
do that.
Yeah.
So I don't even do that, and I'm in the profession of it. I shouldn't even say that. That's bad PR. That I don't go around poking
I
the
love
test
the
buttons.
honesty, though, man.
Hey,
That's
well, I mean, you know, it got to be real, and most people are not even keeping the batteries in them, so
Yeah.
hardwired, and then you want to make sure the battery's good so that when the power goes out, in the unlikely event that the power goes out and there's a fire, that these things operate. But I mean, if you think about it, it's your only line of defense. If you are in a residential home and that's all you got, you have no sprinkler system. So this is your only way. Another tip I do live by, this one, is I keep the doors shut. Like the doors closed in your home can, like, especially when you're sleeping,
Oh wow.
can give you like a big window or a larger window of time for you to be able to evacuate your home. And so, I keep my door shut when, at night, because that can give you some time to hopefully exit the home. And so that's a tip that I do live by. But yeah, it's important to keep your detectors up to date, and your CO detectors, your carbon monoxide detectors, as well as your um, smoke detectors. So that's important.
Do you close
Very
all your
important.
doors in the house?
Yeah, I do, and sometimes I'll leave some open, but usually I will just close them, just because for my peace of mind, I feel better about it, even though the unlikely event. But if you think about it, when we design for big buildings, we design for compartmentation, which
Yeah.
is the ability to kind of close off pieces of the building from the rest of the building so you don't have smoke traveling through the entirety of the building. So it's
Makes
like,
sense. Yeah.
it's not the same, because your door's not smoke tight, but it would provide you more time. I mean, like I said, it's a matter of minutes before your home is untenable. So anything you could do is beneficial.
Yeah, that's all. This conversation's been awesome, man. Before I let you go, though, obviously, I want to touch on some personal stuff. I always ask these questions to everybody on the show. Actually, made a little side thing with this question because I always get a different answer. I love this question. So,
Yeah.
what about you personally? What lessons have you learned throughout your journey that we should all apply to our own businesses, our own lives to help us grow?
Yeah, man. I would say for me personally, part of the reason I have the podcast, and part of the reason why I, care so much in life and professionally, is just always keep learning.
Mm.
Always be pushing yourself to, develop and to be competitive in life. It's so important. I think at today's day and age, where technology and the way we do business is just foot on the throttle, accelerating, and it's not stopping anytime soon. um, it's so important to me to keep developing professionally and to keep trying to learn something new every day, because it's just a core tenet of who I am. And like, yeah, I would say that would be my huge piece, is stay hungry, keep learning. And it's important. It's crazy to see how you will, I don't want to say outpace, but just continue to develop beyond those who are just happy with kind of stagnating or happy with the status quo. It really just shows up that 1% difference if you take the time and the effort to lean into whatever you're doing. So, I mean, that's a big thing for me. It's something that I live by. So, I'd say that's my big takeaway. Keep learning.
Yeah, I can relate with you big time on that. I love that answer just because I'm a big advocate on just keep learning, keep trying to get better personally in every kind of way you can. It's like what you're doing and I'm doing right now with the podcast. I mean, it's just a way to get better, but it's also
Yeah.
a way to just meet new people like me and you would have never met.
Yeah.
And it's you and I was actually on somebody's podcast the other day and talking about this, and it's like you can have somebody come on your podcast and it's like you feel like you've known each other for a
Yeah.
while, it's like that because you're having an open discussion, you're
Right.
having, you can relate to a lot of people. And it's crazy to me, not just with podcasting but other things, even with social media, other things, just there's a lot of people like you said that aren't willing to learn or get ahead or just better themselves in some kind of way, and they just live that same exact life every day, every weekend, look forward to the same things on the weekend, and nothing changes. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I just, in my head, if you're not trying to, if you're not trying to, first of all, if you're not moving forward, you're already behind. But if
Yeah.
you're not trying to move forward and be competitive, you're not even going to stay on par. So in my head, it's like you're not going to survive if you just choose to, just exist as you are, because to life is the only thing that is certain is life, and life has changed. So in my head, I'm like, you're not in the game unless you are not only trying to progress, but trying to keep up to date, to keep competitive, to really be on, have your finger on the pulse of what's happening, and who are the mover and shakers, and this sort of thing. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Love that, man. Another question I always like to ask is, everybody asks about your past. Let's hear about your future. So, where will we see Gus in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Who will you be?
Man, I that's a great question. I got man, I'd say I have big dreams. Want to be a lot better fire protection engineer. Want to do really good things with the podcast. Want to keep connecting with people and making moves and putting out content for those who are interested in fire and life safety. I want to really just take that as far as it can go and keep developing as a professional, get more into the business development side of things and acquiring projects, and helping out the company, and really just take that to the moon. I got big plans, and I have big ambitions, and I think that's important in life too, is shooting for the moon, but not to be too cliche about it all. But um, yeah, that's kind of where I'm headed. Be a better fire protection engineer. Continue to be the best podcast host slash content creator that I can be, and yeah, just excited to stay being an entrepreneur and take it to the limit.
There you go, man. I love it. And then my last question, what this show's all about: what exactly do people need to look for when hiring a fire safety professional, and
Ooh,
why should they choose Gus Gagliardi
ooh.
as their fire professional of choice?
Well, we talked about integrity, so that's a great thing to harken back to. Integrity and providing quality product, and taking value in mind, and really being able to provide a competitive solution as well as keeping your integrity. I think that's something that is a through line in my career, and FSB's 75 years in business, and so I think that's a great proponent. And yeah, yeah, like I said, I spend all my free time talking to industry professionals and picking their brains on how to stay competitive, and re-listening to my own voice, which I could stand to do less of, and editing these episodes and going back and picking out the little nuggets of value. So I spend all my free time trying to learn more about the industry, and better myself. So there's another pretty decent point as well.
There you go, man. Hey, I appreciate you, Gus. This has been awesome, man. It's so much great info, and like I said, I love hitting these these niche kind of spaces that people, don't really talk about and don't really think about. Because I mean, you got me thinking a lot too on the building end, and I mean, hopefully in the future, like we talked about, there's some more fire safety stuff implemented into some of these homes, because it doesn't make sense, but I could probably talk to you for hours about historical fires and everything. I'm excited for that episode to come out too. So
I'll be
when you
sure to
do that,
tag you when it drops.
yeah, yeah, I'd appreciate that, man, because I definitely want to listen to that one. Last thing, just so people know, where can they find you, connect with you, and also find your podcast too?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time posting and trying to create content for people. That's Gus Gagliardi on LinkedIn. And then you can check me out at firecodetech.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So I bring content for Firecode Tech, interviews on a biweekly basis. And then I just started cranking out solo cast, which is basically I'll take a specific topic, let's say codes or standards or specific technologies like fire alarm systems, standpipe systems, sprinklers, and break them down into digestible pieces for fundamentals and for yeah, professional development sake. So yeah, come check it out if that's something you're interested in.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on today, and everybody listening. Obviously, you know what to do: like, subscribe, 5 stars only. That's all I allow. And also take 2 seconds, say this is the best podcast in the world in the comments on iTunes. And I will see you guys on the next episode.